Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU Audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Journalism and New Media Studies, SOJNMS, Master's Program. Master of Arts, Journalism and Electronic Media, MAJEM. First year. MJM-020 Introduction to Journalism and Mass Communication. Block-1 Introduction to Communication. Unit-1 Communication, Concept and Process. 1.0 Introduction. What exactly is communication? The word is derived from the Latin word communize, which means to make common. Communication, at the simplest level, involves understanding what someone conveys and means and in turn making someone else understand what you mean. However, for communication to take place, it is important for some basic understanding to exist, which is possible only when the two people feel and think about that subject on common lines. The more the commonness between two people, the better their communication gets. In the parlance of communication, the person who sends a message or communicates is called sender, source, and the one who receives it is called the receiver. A well-known media expert, Dennis McQuail, in his book, Mass Communication Theory, defined communication as the process that increases commonality but also requires elements of the commonality to occur at all. Many social scientists have attempted to define communication from different perspectives. One of the oldest and most widely quoted one is from a Western political scientist, Harold Laswell, 1948, who posed some questions the answers to which would have communication defined. He described it as who says what in which channel to whom with what effect? Channel here stands for the medium of communication, which may be language, book, or even a mass medium like radio, television, or newspaper. The effect is the common understanding that communication aims at the building. According to John C. Merrill and Ralph L. Lowenstein, communication is a meeting of minds, a bringing about of a common set of symbols in the minds of participants, in short, an understanding. 1.1 Learning Outcomes. After reading this unit, you will be able to analyze communication, its process and need, describe forms of communication and effective communication, development of communications media, differentiate between conventional and new media, and interpret how media plays a role in social construction of reality. 1.2 Need for communication. Communication is as important a need for all living beings as is food and shelter. And all living beings invariably communicate within their community, be it the evening call of the birds to return back to their homes or barking of dogs in protest when a non-member enters their territory, or the dance of the honeybees to convey to other members where nectar can be found. For human beings too, this is a natural individual and social need, as man is a social animal. No normal human being can exist in isolation, irrespective of his age, gender and interests. 1.3.1 Communication Process. Communication leads to creation of meaning that gets shared between the participants as a continuous, cyclic process. What the sender shares with the receiver is knowledge or information based on his own individual experiences. What the sender understands as an outcome of those experiences is what he further conveys to the receiver. So, one common functional definition for communication can be a cyclic process of sharing of experiences between two or more participants. This brings us to the process of communication. The process of communication involves four basic elements: the sender, S, the message, M, the channel, C, and the receiver, R, which is also called the SMCR model of communication. The representation below, Fig. 1.1, indicates how communication which takes place in a cyclic process. The sender initiates communication by sending a message, and the receiver or the audiences are the ones who receives it. Message is the actual content that the sender desires to convey, and channel is the medium of conveying that message. Channel, the medium of conveying the message, can be mass media, language, gestures, body language, signs and symbols. When the sender sends a message through some channel to the receiver decodes that message in his brain, makes meaning out of it, interpreting, and then encodes the response of that message in his mind and conveys it back to the sender. This process of conveying back is called feedback, an important component in the process of communication. Feedback indicates whether what has been understood is what the source, sender meant, or is it different from the source's understanding. While receiving the feedback, the sender becomes the receiver and the receiver becomes the sender. 1.2.2 Effective communication. A communication is considered effective if it produces the desired results. For example, if a political leader through his speech is able to motivate the electorate to cast their votes for him, his communication may be termed as effective. Alternately, a child tends to take the warning or instructions of his parents or teachers seriously, but will not listen to a stranger. His parents' communication to him is effective, but the latter is not. From both the examples, it is clear that it is the relationship between the source and the receiver that communicates. It is this factor that decides how the meaning would be interpreted at the receiver's end. The perception of the source by the receiver, or the trust factor that exists in their relationship, decides how positively the receiver would respond to the source's message. Any communication is called effective if the meaning of the message interpreted by the receiver is the same as that desired by the sender. The effectiveness of the message would be clear from whether or to what extent any desired behavioral change is brought about in the receiver. This is also termed as feedback, which can be in words and/or actions. The response that a communication message emanates in the receiver is termed as feedback. Feedback may be positive, negative, or neutral. When an employee continues to come late to office despite repeated reminders, it is a negative feedback, as the communication is not having the desired response on the employee. When a student makes all efforts to meet the assignment deadlines of a teacher, it is a positive feedback, as it is the result of the high regard the student may have towards the teacher, and hence the teacher's communication is termed effective. When a voter does not exercise his right to vote, leave alone voting in favor of or against a political leader, then it is called a neutral feedback, as the communication did not have any effect on him. 1.2.3 Barriers to communication. There are certain barriers to communication which may hinder its effectiveness. These may be of varied types. Communicating to the receiver at a wrong, inconvenient time. The message communicated is distorted, i.e., change in the meaning of the message due to noise, some reason. Noise is termed as the change that is introduced in the message so that its meaning does not remain what was intended by the source. Information overload is yet another barrier, as every individual has a limited attention span during which she is receptive to communication messages. Besides technical barriers, there are also language and psychological barriers to communication. Language barriers may be of two kinds. Vocabulary, use of difficult words that the receiver may not understand. Semantics, when the meaning of the message is not clear to the audience, or what the audience understands is different from what the source meant. Psychological barriers may include these factors. Noise. Sometimes when the student in the class is thinking of an India-Pakistan cricket match that is to take place that evening, what the teacher is talking may be noise to him. Alternately, any disturbance in the frequency of a radio channel can create disturbance, and the audience may not be able to hear what is being broadcast. Perception set differences. Over a period of time, individuals build a certain tendency to perceive a message in a certain way. For example, some people believe what advertisements claim about a certain product as their experiences with it may be positive. Alternately, there may be others who may not believe such messages as their experiences with the same product, service may not be satisfactory. This tendency is called perception set. Due to difference in experiences, value systems, beliefs and social realities of individuals, difference in perception set will always exist, due to which a message may not have the same effect on all individuals. Lack of trust and jealousy. These may also be the reasons why a message may not have the desired effect on the audience. Information filtering. The receivers have a tendency to accept only those messages that they find are of interest to them, or reinforce the notions and beliefs that they already have. They filter such information and leave out the rest, thereby becoming another psychological barrier. 1.3 Forms of communication. Having known what communication is, what makes it effective and what reduces its effective capacity, it is also important to know the different forms in which this process is carried out. Though we are exposed to each of these forms in our daily lives, we may have never paid any attention to it. Communication scholars agree that there are 4 basic forms of communication. Intrapersonal communication. This is the kind of communication in which there is only one participant, who is the sender as well as the receiver. This is also known as auto-communication or introspection. Talking to oneself is a good example for this. Interpersonal communication. This communication takes place between 2 participants and the exchange may be formal or informal. It is the most ideal kind of communication, as the sender can get feedback instantly, and as it is one-to-one communication, the sender can also study the body language, gestures, postures, facial expressions etc. of the receiver, which gives ample idea of what the receiver means and whether what is said is also what is meant. Influencing and persuading the other person is also easy, and there is greater scope of appealing to the receiver emotionally by means of motivating, encouraging and coordinating. It is also known as dyadic communication. Group communication. This is an extension of interpersonal communication, and the exchange involves more than 2 people, where the participants get a chance to express themselves on subjects of common interests. This communication serves many goals like collective decision-making, self-expression, and relaxation, and is effective as it gives opportunity to interact directly with the receivers. One common aspect of such a communication is that it sees the emergence of a leader who coordinates the communication within the group. Mass communication. This is the communication that takes place with the help of a mechanical device that multiplies messages and takes it to a large, faceless audience simultaneously. The use of mass media like newspaper, radio, television and internet is needed in this kind of communication. The source and the receiver are physically separated in time and space. The audience is anonymous and heterogeneous. The feedback in mass communication is slow, weak and delayed. Different forms of the above-mentioned communication are effective in different communication contexts. The widest reach is of mass communication, but the most effective is interpersonal communication. For example, to make the general public aware of a new product, advertisements and publicity are the best ways for which use of mass media is mandatory. On the other hand, for a desired change in an individual's behavior like quitting communication, it is more fruitful to counsel when there was less communication and communication channels in the society. Communication would be lived on the basis of equality, as there was no hierarchy among people. Later, those who controlled the channels of communication emerged stronger, while the others were weak. With changing times and technology, the communications media developed as people realized the subtle though strong effect media could have in influencing public opinion. In the earlier societies, it was the number of women a man had that determined his status in the society. Later, the number of cattle one owned was indicative of one's status. Even later, it was how much land one had that determined it, and then it was the riches that counted most. These stages of societal development on the basis of economic development are identified as pre-agricultural societies, there were small communities that existed with mostly spoken words as their means of communication and comprised of hunters and food gatherers. Agricultural societies, people practiced agriculture to earn their living. Writing came into being, and these were more developed societies with a complex social structure. But a huge chunk of population still remained illiterate. Industrial societies, this was the machine age and was marked by the publication of Gutenberg's Bible in as early as 1455. This drastically improved the speed of book printing that was earlier copied by hand, by the use of movable metal type. Mass production became the mantra, and industrial production was centered in cities, which led to huge migration of people from rural to urban areas. Jobs in these industries became more important than farming. Information society. The second half of 1900s saw the emergence of information societies primarily in the United States. But from the second half of the century till its end, most economies of the world had drifted towards it, because of which media became much more important than before. One important invention of the time was computer, that became the main tool to handle information, its creation, processing and distribution. Today information is power. Those who have better sources of information are more resourceful and stronger in the society. They are the opinion leaders and are listened to, while others do not wield such a control. The information society has also seen different conventional media forms merging together into one, thus becoming cheaper, more accessible and faster. The conventional media forms that comprised different communication technologies merged together into a computer-readable digital form. The earlier technologies were analogous or linear in nature, while digital technologies could be stored and used in any format and were easy to use. This process of merging of technologies to give better output of more than one conventional media technology is called convergence. For example, a mobile phone serves the purpose of a phone as well as a computer, as emails can be accessed on it and internet can be browsed. Also, a computer acts as television, as channels can be accessed on it. Television and computers, on the other hand, have made DVD players outdated. All these examples show how the output of more than one technology can be had from a more compact and cheaper technology. Also, these technologies are interactive, which makes feedback an inclusive process of communication. It enables the improvement of message. This fast exchange of information through cyber networks has led to coining of the term information superhighway, irrespective of the communication objective, which may be social networking, e-commerce, e-governance or professional communication. Before we delve further into this discussion of the 21st century technology, let us take a view of the characteristic features of conventional media that dominated the communication media scene for long and the new media that has lately emerged. Newspapers. The ancestors of newspapers were called currantos, which were news sheets that were published as long back as 1620s in England and Holland with irregular periodicity. Later, around 1640s, diurnals appeared in England that were dailies publishing reports on domestic events. They were the actual ancestors of the newspapers we see today. At present, we have two formats in which newspapers appear: broadsheets, for example, the Indian Express, the Times of India, and tabloids, for example Mail Today and Mint. Broadsheets are the morningers that carry hard news and opinions based on them, while most tabloids are eveningers or evening papers that are more of news magazines or feature newspapers. While broadsheets come up with fresh news, tabloids carry features and detailed stories based on them. While the advantage of newspapers is that they sell cheap, they can reach out only to the literate section of the population. Over the last 6 to 7 years, a lot of experimentation has been done in Indian newspapers. From reducing their sizes in order to make them portable to dividing them into as many sections as can be covered in order to cater to maximum number of readers. Innovations are also brought out to market them as a product and as a viewpoint. While their circulation is dying out in the West, in India, they are soaring high. Magazines. The earliest magazine was published in England in 1730s. Though they primarily focused on politics, they were then called miscellanies as they carried a wide variety of contents. In the later part of 1800s, magazines made efforts for popularizing magazine reading, and there was a widespread growth due to increase in literacy, reduced costs to ensure greater sales, and because in that era of industrialization, more and more businesses wanted a platform to put forth their advertisements and publicity messages. Today, magazines are generally classified into general interest and special interest magazines. The first category is of those magazines that cover a number of subjects to cater to wider masses, for example, India Today, Outlook, and the second category is the one that caters to a niche audience, for example, Better Photography, National Geographic and Business World. Most newspaper groups own the magazines that one generally sees on the newsstands. The reason that when the ad flow increases, the newspaper's capacity to publish also increases. Newspaper groups come up with sister concerns in the form of magazines that have longer shelf life and hence make advertisement publication a costlier affair. Radio. Radio was first invented by an Italian named Marconi in the 1890s. He is called the father of radio broadcasting, or transmitting voices and music to a geographically separated large audience had begun through telephone itself, which was invented by Alexander Graham Bell before the advent of radio. That is when radio became a mass medium. In India, the first license for transmitting a broadcast was given in February 1922 while the air was formed in June 1936. The most important time in the history of radio was during the Second World War, when this medium of addressing the masses became immensely significant. This was because the Nazis in Germany used it for propaganda, and by playing German music which would give an impression that they had conquered the areas where the music was played, they could damage the morale of their rival forces. FM broadcasts first started in Chennai, then Madras, in 1977, and in Jalandhar, Punjab, in 1992. Private players came into the picture only in 1993. Radio later developed into a youth medium. Today, radio's approach is more local in nature, right from giving traffic updates to playing popular music. The advantage of this medium is that it is mobile, does not require reading ability, and can be enjoyed without demanding sole attention on the medium itself, unlike television. These days, the emergence of community radio is seen in large numbers, which makes more specialized programs for a niche audience. Television. Television first started developing in the 1920s and 1930s. After the printing press, television is considered to be the most important communication invention. By late 1940s and early 1950s, television had become a part of life of most of the developed countries. In India, television was introduced with the objective of bringing about development in the year 1959. By 1970, the content on TV included news, information and entertainment programs including Krishi Darshan, which began in January 1967 for farmers in 80 villages. Commercials were first telecast in January 1976. Today, the number of television channels in India outnumber the time one can afford to spend watching them even once a week. The race for TRPs, television rating points, which decide the popularity of a TV show or a channel, is of prime importance as it directly affects the ad revenue that the channel earns. In fact, for the very reason, channels do not mind compromising on work ethics or building agenda for public discussion for their vested interests. 24-hour news channels have become a reality with no sanctity of what should be called news. In fact, television creates reality that may sometimes not be real. For example, the portrayal of superwomen in Indian media, one who can single-handedly carry out all tasks in personal, professional and social life without faltering at any point of time, is the one who is termed the ideal Indian modern woman.